Hello and welcome to Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Mark Gillen of the 128th District in Berks and Lancaster counties. On today's program, I'd like to introduce you to a player in the budget process you may not be familiar with. The Independent Fiscal Office was created in 2010 to study the economy of Pennsylvania and make nonpartisan projections on how much money the state is expected to collect in taxes. This information, along with other economic research they conduct, is used to set up the framework for each year's budget. Joining me today to explain the work of the IFO is Deputy Director Mark Ryan. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Independent Fiscal Office, I'm going to venture to guess that as I walk the streets of the district and visit with people, very few people have heard of the Independent Fiscal Office. What say ye in terms of the public psyche of knowing who you are? Would that be your impression also in talking to people?
I think that's accurate, and we've become better known over time as we've put out our reports and put out our information. Our information is available to the public via our website. We produce numerous reports, but most of our interaction is with the General Assembly and the executive branch, the agencies, the Office of the Budget, as we deal with budgetary matters. So that's much of our communication, but we also see it as part of our mission to provide information to the general public and increase the transparency of budget information for everyone, and as well as providing assistance and information to the General Assembly.
In a world of partisanship, you're nonpartisan.
That's right.
You provide tools, information, data to either party, any group.
That's right. We try to the best of our ability to develop unbiased models using the best information that's available, which is not always perfect information, but we use what we have and try to ignore the partisan debate and present the information. And maybe it's the highest compliment to us when we have each side in a debate using our numbers to justify a position. And I think that tells us that folks that are looking at it see some of the value in what we produce.
What's your background, Mark? Where did you come from? Where did you get your training? How'd you end up in this landing pad?
Well, I started, I got my graduate degree in policy analysis from the Heinz School at Carnegie Mellon University. Ended up in Harrisburg as my first job out of graduate school, doing revenue estimates and tax analysis for the Department of Revenue. And from there, I made various stops in the General Assembly with the House of Representatives and the Senate before coming over to the Independent Fiscal Office as Deputy Director. And I've been in that position, and I'm in my 7th year there, pretty much almost from the start of the creation of the office. So we're proceeding, and I think I've hopefully been able to use some of my background to inform some of the work of the office.
You like numbers.
That's our lifeblood. Numbers is what we live for, and we try to the best of our ability to try to make sense of numbers for people on the outside and people on the inside.
Let me ask you kind of a contemporary question relative to what we saw just passed in Washington. Federal plan for taxes moving forward. I've sat down with an accountant. There seem to be some pros and cons relative to the average individual, whatever situation they find themselves in. Looks very good for business. How does that affect Pennsylvania and Pennsylvania's revenue estimates and situation?
Well, it could have a very significant impact on Pennsylvania revenues. Within the last week or so, the week to 10 days, we published a mid-year update, which is sort of the halfway point of the current fiscal year. And in that, we reevaluated our revenue estimates and then added some discussion about what we think will happen to Pennsylvania revenues based on the federal tax bill. And based on our estimates, we think it does have a material impact. It could end up boosting sales tax because there's a potential increase in take-home pay and disposable personal income at the state level that could end up boosting sales tax revenues depending on how much of that people spend. There are also some shifts that will be affecting our budget because of the federal tax bill changed incentives regarding the payment of state and local taxes. Many folks accelerated payment at the end of 2017 of their state taxes where they could, and so they could claim the deduction. For those folks who would be subject to the cap on the federal deduction, it was to their financial advantage to pay earlier.
$10,000 cap on the aggregate tax load.
Correct. So folks in that situation had an incentive to pay early, which means we got a little extra money in December, January timeframe, but it's money that we won't get in April. So it would affect the cash flow. There are also some impacts between fiscal years. So we've tried to analyze that in a detailed presentation about our assessment of federal tax changes and the most recent estimates for revenues is available on our website. And there's a report called the Mid-Year Update, very aptly named, and it goes into quite a bit of detail on that.
Based on what you're saying, just a very sterile question here, do you think it's going to be good for Pennsylvania, what you understand, what you're reading about in terms of the federal changes?
Well, we try not to assess whether it's good or bad. What we would do is look at the likely impacts and try to put a number on them. And if we can't put a pinpoint number, and these are estimates, so it's maybe best thought of as a range, but we would try to say, here's what we think will happen. And then it's up to it's in the eye of the beholder to decide whether that's good or bad.
Well, if you tell me sales taxes are going to increase, and that's a big enchilada in terms of the pie of revenue for Pennsylvania, personal income tax, sales tax, very substantive. So that would be a positive in terms of revenue.
Yeah, they would certainly, those types of actions would certainly help facilitate passage of future budgets.
You've been at this, in this position, did you say 7 years?
We're going on 7. We're in our 7th year now.
All right, just between us, is this a career? You're going to stay with this? You like what you're doing, obviously.
I love numbers. I love being able to provide insight and analysis, and we really enjoy what we're doing.
It's obvious. Property tax is a big issue in the community that I come from, and I know you've run numbers up the flagpole before relative to the swap. And the common swap that we've heard about is an uptick in personal income tax, increase in sales tax, and swap that for the local property tax burden. A question that may be hard to answer because you keep doing this and running these numbers, but we haven't consummated a bill. Are you optimistic that this could potentially get done, could happen, and if so, do the numbers work to make it a property tax elimination formula for Pennsylvanians?
The biggest thing that's happened recently is the passage of the constitutional amendment that would permit the General Assembly to exempt 100% of the value of homesteads or owner-occupied property from the property tax. And that has the potential to be a significant development depending on which way the General Assembly goes, because it seems to me, and I'm somewhat on the outside hearing what's going on, but it seems to me there's two different schools of thought. Eliminate all property taxes, which has a higher price tag if you're looking to replace
commercial
all of that revenue.
Homestead, right.
Commercial homestead, everything. Or focus only on the homesteads, which has a somewhat lower price tag. And then I think it becomes a matter of the degree of difficulty in finding the revenues one needs to meet those thresholds. And at a certain point, it becomes where do you get the money? And what are the trade-offs involved in in raising an income tax or a sales tax or expanding the base of a sales tax, because those are probably the most likely options if one's looking to generate some replacement revenue.
In terms of economic multipliers, if you put more dollars into the, and you've mentioned this with reference to the federal tax changes, but if you eliminated the property tax, let's just talk on a homestead for a moment, and you put those extra dollars into somebody's pocketbook, the consumer is going to go out and spend. Is it not likely that revenues would increase, not just because you've upticked the sales tax, but because the public is consuming more with those discretionary dollars?
What we would do is we would look at all of the offsetting impacts. So we would look at the elimination of the property tax, whether it's for all properties or just homeowner properties. And we'd also look at where the replacement revenue is coming from. So we'd look at both sides of the equation and see that for some households, they would be net winners. And those households might be expected to spend some of those savings and in turn stimulate the economy. There might also be some households that would pay more under an income or sales tax. So when we would pursue an analysis, we would try to incorporate all of those details and figure out the net effect, so that much of it depends on the specifics of a proposal and how the details are constructed.
Sure. I know this is beyond your purview because I view the property tax as a freedom-based issue. Also, I think you should own your property free and clear, and it should not be subject to an unreasonable seizure. I have 5 daughters at home. And so on the consumptive side of the equation, I might actually even pay a little bit more while they're all in the house, but owning your own home is critically important, and it's important to the future of my daughters remaining in Pennsylvania. Would you like to weigh in just for a minute in terms of making Pennsylvania more attractive for people not only to move here, but to stay? If you were to eliminate a property tax, let's just say for argument's sake on the homestead side of the equation, Pennsylvania is regarded as high tax burden in the aggregate. If we were to alleviate that burden, I think it's conceivable that people would come to Pennsylvania, or certainly stay in Pennsylvania, and then that would enhance the economic multipliers.
Yeah, I think all of those things need to be considered when devising a package. The benefits of eliminating property tax versus where you get the money to pay for it. How does it come from income? Does it come from sales? How does that affect our competitive stance versus other states? And it would be certainly good to be able to attract more working age families and individuals to boost our economy, because in the long run that helps promote economic growth if we can attract those folks.
Sure, we'd be a mecca and a destination. There is no state that's an example of complete elimination of property tax on the homestead side of the equation, certainly, which purpose this conversation, a constitutional amendment we're discussing. There may be examples where you could go into state and means test out of the property tax or age test out of the property tax eventually, but there's not an example of anybody that has a mosaic where you can come in. Just think of the opportunity there for people to say, I can move to Pennsylvania and my homestead property tax is eliminated. I think that's very attractive. I had some family members actually move out of Pennsylvania. One's in the process now of moving. You know, the South Carolinas, the North Carolinas, the Tennessees of the world, they start to look very attractive when you're on a fixed income. And I think it's unfortunate we're losing some of the best and brightest out of the Commonwealth.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
We've looked at some migration data, and we found that Pennsylvania is a net exporter of individuals, at least under age 75. After age 75, we become a net importer. Perhaps people who've moved out previously coming back, but certainly we've been losing working age individuals to other states.
Spending more time on this than I planned, I'm delighted for the discussion. So if we're losing, you said, the under 75 crowd, okay, those are prime working years, those are very productive years. What does that say about the state of our economy and where we're heading as Pennsylvania ages?
We have some challenges ahead of us in the next 10 years. There's a demographic bubble, and the number of individuals age 65 and older will probably increase by more than 30% in that time period, while the working age population is projected to decline, just based on taking a snapshot of current demographics and aging people out, figuring in the current birth rates and death rates. We're likely to see a significant shift in the composition of our population to an older average age. And that most of our economic growth generally, theory tells us, comes from the number of people who are working. So if the number of working age individuals declines, that makes it more of a challenge for us going forward.
Certainly in terms of budget and consumption of resources, I just got off the phone a few minutes ago with a 91-year-old. It was my mom. She called me as I was on my way in here, and she lives in Philadelphia. But as we increase the average age of the population in Pennsylvania, it seems to me we're going to be consuming more state resources, and we need to make Pennsylvania more attractive for that young family, not only moving here, but staying in the first place.
Exactly. And we know from our own research that there's aging, kind of the aging of the Pennsylvania population has impacts on the revenue side, because once one retires, Pennsylvania exempts retirement income. So we lose some tax revenue on that, and that's a gain to the retired individual. And there's a shift in sales tax or consumption, because we don't tax many services. And much of the spending for a retired household, it shifts more towards non-taxable goods. So there's an adjustment on the revenue side. And on the spending side, much of our state budget is consumed by long-term care, medical assistance. And for those who are disabled and qualify for medical assistance, that can be fairly expensive, either because of infirmity or income.
You've given some good reasons to stay in Pennsylvania. I read a Kiplinger study. It's several years dated now. It was the best places to retire in the United States. And as you mentioned, Pennsylvania doesn't tax the pension income, the Social Security. A lot of people like Pennsylvania in terms of what it has to offer. You want urban, you want major sports teams, Eagles, Steelers, Flyers, have to mention the Eagles there after the Super Bowl. So it's an attractive place to spend the entire life, certainly your twilight years. But when that study finally analyzed everything, it was like, this is the best place to retire, until it hit one item, the property tax. It shows the capital city and the average property tax did that for all the states. Instead of being at the top of the heap, we ended up at the bottom of the heap because of the property tax. And so I think that is driving people out of the Commonwealth. And the way we grow ourselves out of this economic situation that we're in is we encourage people to stay, to consume, to spend in the Commonwealth. Let's talk about revenue for a little bit here. Fiscal year, governor's budget address. This is the season where people are looking at revenue projections. Where are we at right now? Snapshot in time.
Well, right now, revenues are running strong. We feel very good about our revenue estimate. Because of some cash timing issues, we're running ahead of estimate, but we think by the end of the fiscal year that we'll be just on estimate or very modestly ahead. Our most recent adjustment, we increased our fiscal year estimate by $35 million, which in a $35 billion budget is practically nothing. But we made some adjustments based on current year-to-date trends, as well as our expectations for the effects of federal tax changes on taxpayer behavior. So on net, I think our estimate is holding up very well, and there might be our adjustment was very minor on the upside.
Can you take us inside the Independent Fiscal Office, and if we could draw back the curtain there? I imagine there's a certain amount of debate and you know, you see the federal changes or the stock market, something going on in the swirl around you that you cannot control. What are some of the tensions, not in a negative way, but you know, the frictions to say, wait, I'm not quite sure about this number, or have you taken this into account? Take us inside that room or that building.
Sure. And it's a fairly small office. There are 10 of us all together. One administrative assistant, director, myself, and the rest are analysts in one form or another who we sit down in a collaborative process and work through the numbers. I mean, we'll talk about the kind of how good are the data? Can we get better data? How do you interpret it? And we'll walk through it, and we sit down, and when we put out a major report, it's all hands on deck. Everybody has input either into the assumptions, and also it's important how we explain it, because we try to be clear in our explanations. It's not just getting the numbers right, it's trying to explain it in a way that people can understand, and we always try to improve on that.
So is there sometimes a little debate with these analysts? All right, you know, they're smart people, they're well trained, they're looking at a plethora of information. Sometimes people see things a little differently.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
We have nearly everybody on our staff has some training in economics and has a degree or significant coursework in economics, and that's the world that we inhabit. And everybody has a different take on maybe a piece of data, and we sit down, we talk it through and hash it out, and everybody gets to share an opinion on how it's best to proceed. In the end, we have a director that has to make the call and has the responsibility to make a decision on how to go. But we have a lot of input into that process before we get to that point.
Well, I would say if you came as close as you just described in trying to reach a conclusion about budget projections, revenue projections, you're doing very well. It's a fractional part of 1% in terms of tweaking and recalibrating those projections. Let's talk about, I mentioned this coming in, impact fee.
Yes.
Marcellus, corporate taxes, kind of the general climate in Pennsylvania to start a business here in general, but impact fee. I actually began to open that up and take a look, and there's been some changes there in terms of the Marcellus impact fee.
Yeah, the impact fee is a per well fee on wells that are drilled in the Marcellus Shale, on the unconventional wells, the Marcellus Shale wells. And the fee varies based on how old the well is, so that the fee is highest for the newly drilled wells, and it goes down a little bit over time. And what our office does is look at the fee schedule, the number of wells in production, the age of the wells, and we try to estimate how much will be generated by the impact fee. It'll be paid in April, and we estimated that approximately $219 million will be collected, which is about a $43 million increase from last year, mainly because the average price of gas went up above $3 per MMBTU on the New York Mercantile Exchange. So
Right.
I'm getting into too many details.
It's fine. Yeah.
But that triggered an adjustment in the statute that specifies a different fee schedule. So the fee schedule changed because of the price of gas on the NYMEX, and so the per well fee is higher. That boosted the fee revenues, or we project that it will, and along with new drilling, more than 800 new wells were drilled this year. So that helps to boost the fees as well. But most of the increase came from just a stronger price of gas.
What's your sense of the tax load on business? That would be Marcellus, any business in Pennsylvania, 9.9 on the corporate side of the tax. How would you quantify that load as compared to other states?
Well, the rate is highest among, or second highest among all of the states at the marginal level. Pennsylvania has a narrower tax base because we're a separate company state, So it makes it harder to compare. I think on a per capita basis, we fall more towards the middle of the pack, according to my recollection. But there's a big disparity between the top rate and then kind of the average payment. And that's what makes it challenging with our corporate tax, because of the tax base. It's a somewhat narrower base, but there's a very high rate, and that can have different incentives for different businesses depending on their situation.
As we go down the highway of time, what do you see? We're snapshotting the current year. What challenges do you see for Pennsylvania? What are you pulling out, when you pull out this crystal ball and you all surround it? Illumine us on what you gaze on.
Every November, we produce a 5-year report where we try to get out the crystal ball and project where things will be, assuming the current policies stay in place. So we look to the future and say, if we don't really change anything, what are the trends? And we see continued challenges resulting from our aging demographics on the revenue and expenditure side. So we think there are some future budgetary challenges that could occur just absent some changes in policy. And that's one of the things that we try to highlight for the General Assembly.
In terms of pension and what we're projecting in terms of burden, I don't know how far down that highway can go here in a closing minute or two. What would you like to see happen? What do you anticipate? How large, and I believe it's a significant challenge, how large of a challenge from the fiscal office, independent fiscal office side of the equation, do you see the pension being?
There was a very substantial change in pension benefits for future employees, starting for those hired in 2019 and after. That will take some time to have an effect, but what we've seen so far is that the pension contributions have leveled off as a share of the state budget. Future will depend on market returns, but there is a path now to pay down a fairly substantial pension liability that's in the $60 to $70 billion range of unfunded liabilities. So it will take some time to do that. Pennsylvania has been making its required contributions, so our current projection indicates it should be fairly steady, but certainly it's a fairly high level at this point.
I know that there's not cheering that goes on in the independent fiscal office when you see the legislature do something, and I voted for the change in the pension system. Were you buoyed up a little bit that finally we're dealing with something that's huge in the way of a liability for Pennsylvania?
Yeah, it really took a step in addressing the liabilities. It's just a slow process. With that size, it takes a while to see the results.
Yeah, we didn't get there overnight, and we're not going to get out of it overnight, but it was a step in the right direction. Thank you. I'm State Representative Mark Gillen. If you have any questions about what we've discussed today, feel free to contact me at my local office or through my website. That information will be shown in a moment. Thanks for watching, and please join me next time for Legislative Report.